This episode is brought to you by New Balance. Hey, it's Elena Samuela. As a running and strength coach, my life revolves around movement, but not necessarily for the reasons you'd think. Thanks to New Balance, I run for my mind just as much as my body. There's kind of this meditational aspect to running. It makes for the most inspiring and the most emotionally charged runs. Head to newbalance.com/beyondtherun to explore the power of movement.
This episode is brought to you by Strivectin. Blackheads, congested pores, oily skin. If you struggle with any of these, you need to try the new Super Shrink Pore Minimizing Serum from Strivectin. It's clinically proven to reduce the appearance of pores and blackheads, and it helps reduce excess oil without leaving your skin feeling dry or tight, making it the perfect addition to your skincare routine. Shop now at Strivectin.com. That's STRIVECTIN.com.
I'm Nick Westergaard, and this is On Brand, helping you tell your story. My guest this week is Todd Irwin.
How do you tell the best story? And if you can tell the best story, you're going to give yourself an advantage. You know, depositioning brands and market, understanding pain points. It all leads to one thing, which is brand story. And the brands that tell the best stories always do better.
Todd Irwin is the Chief Strategy Officer and founder of Fazer, a brand strategy and creative agency. He has developed a compelling brand strategy methodology that delivers business-to-brand strategic alignment to position companies more competitively in markets. Todd brings 30-plus years of brand strategy experience, helping big brands such as Coca-Cola, Nike, Verizon, Walmart, Pepsi, and Taylor, Macy's, Olive Garden, and the New York Times, as well as a host of SMBs and early-stage funded growth companies. Todd, welcome to On Brand.
Hey, Nick. Good to be here. That was a great read, by the way.
I try. I try. And, there's always the Freudian slips. I about said Freudian strip, which I guess would be a slip in and of itself.
Let's talk about that.
Wait a minute. That's a different meeting. That's a different
podcast episode.
No, I am excited to chat, and my Freudian slip in there that listeners won't notice because I edited it out.
That's right.
But was going to brand strategy. I almost said brand storytelling framework, but or brand strategy methodology. So. Yeah. I'm curious because I feel like, we end up on all the buzzwords of story, which is probably where that Freudian slip came from. But when it comes to brand strategy, I feel like that's something that we nod along with. And yep, we need one of those. But when it comes to actually doing the work, we're often dumbfounded of what does the brand strategy look like? What's it supposed to look like? So where do you and your methodology fall on that process or lack thereof?
Well, I mean, it is a real process. There and most branding agencies are taking their clients through a specific process. When it comes to methodology in general, it's how you approach having a company appear in a market and how you specifically position that company in the market. So it's probably the most important part of strategy in general. And I think, some of the best branding experts, in our industry who have written about this are people like David Acker and Eric Joachim-Staller. Al Rees, his books on positioning. Sometimes, and it's interesting because I know a lot of not founders, but I know a lot of people who run branding agencies, and they don't focus as much on positioning as I think they should. I think positioning is probably the most powerful part of brand strategy. So, I see that there's a lot of agencies that are still focused on things like USP, unique selling propositions, and differentiation and purpose. And although those things are incredibly important to tell the overall brand story, really looking at a market and figuring out how they're going to how you're going to position a brand in that market against the competition is specifically what I'm talking about, and it's what we do as an agency. For us, we've learned more so from business strategy agencies like the McKinseys, Deloitte's, Bains of the world on how they position businesses in markets. And we've taken a lot of those learnings to the brand strategy side. And what we really focus on is this thing called depositioning, right? Positioning a brand in a market so it depositions competitors. And how do you do that? You're really focusing on customer pain points. And how does the product, how does the service solve a customer pain point? That's the first most important thing when it comes to positioning or depositioning. The second is competitor weaknesses. We dig deep and we look at markets and we try to figure out what are the weaknesses of the specific brand's competition, and how do we solve for those weaknesses? The weaknesses, the customer pain points, putting them together to create a depositioning strategy for brands. So that's specifically what we do from a methodology standpoint. I mean, the process is really about starting with research. Doing interviews with founders. One of the big things that we believe in is working directly with leadership, because that's really what the vision is. Because what you're doing is you're looking to really understand what's the business strategy. The magic happens when you really understand the business strategy and can align a brand strategy to a business strategy. It's we actually are working, and we have been over the last few years, with a lot of funded startup companies, funded by VCs, and the way that they approach brand is very minimal. They don't think about it too much, and they need to, because when they do, it increases value. And it's always surprising to us that these companies, they don't put as much emphasis and focus and value on brand strategy at the beginning. So what happens is they have a business idea, they build it, and they get to a point, and they're really trying to get into the market, and they realize, wait, we should have thought about this. And then what happens is, you don't have the money for the big agencies, so they go to a junior agency, and they're focused more on, let's create a nice looking brand, and we'll do some differentiating here and there, and if we're different, it's good. But really, what they need to do is look at how they solve a customer problem and how they can do a better job than their competitors. So.
Well, we don't always line everything up like this on the On Brand podcast, but you began that talking about some of those great fundamentals of things like positioning. A book that I'm looking at on my shelf always makes the cut, even as I always go through running out of shelf space, but that is never far away. A great book that I can't recommend enough, and sounds like that same approach grounds your work. But what I'm amazed that we lined up, you also mentioned the work of David Auker, who, if I have my timing of upcoming guests right, is actually the show that immediately, or the episode that immediately precedes this one.
Wow.
And David was talking about sort of the same thing that you were, that you have, whether it's startups, whether it's some other aspect of a new business, but for whatever reason, brand isn't making it on the radar. And I don't. Any thoughts on why we're missing brand, only to discover after the fact, as you painted the picture there, that it's something that's going to catch up with us?
So when you say we're missing the mark on brand, or customers, not customers, but brands are missing, companies are missing the mark when it comes to the value of brand, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. David talked about it as kind of a lens of brand, because I sometimes think branding gets kind of subjugated within the marketing department, and it's this thing that marketing does. But when it comes to a larger business strategy.
Yeah.
It does, and that's why I love both what you said about leaders, but it seems like, to be a little punny, it seems like we've mispositioned brand in terms of how we should think about it as an organization. I was just curious as to how or why we've ended up here, you think, or with so many.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've been running brand strategy creative agencies for about 20 years now. My observation is that up until about 5 years ago, it was a ton of education at the C-suite level when it came to convincing them that there was real value. And we would go back into a lot of the research and look at like things that David Acker, Wally Olins, David Ogilvy, who were trying to really put value on branding. Marty Neumeier as well, talks about it in a bunch of his books, especially The Brand Gap. And we would do that as an agency. We're like, okay, we need to educate leadership, whether it's the board or a C-suite, on what the value is. For the last 5 years, though, I must say that more and more clients are coming to us and saying, we get it, right? But they still need to be taught, right? And they still need to understand. Now, there's always been this dialogue or narrative around brand valuation, right? And how do you calculate the brand valuation? And the dialogue talks about brand being an intangible asset. I actually disagree with that. I actually think that brand is a very tangible asset because brand is holistic. It's the complete entity of a company. It's not just the logo. It's not just the story. Okay, obviously very important things, right? The visual and the verbal communication of the brand. It's not just how you advertise, how you promote, all the collateral material you put out there, all the communication material you put out there. It's the product. It's the people, right? It's the complete entity, the holistic entity of a company, right? And in that fact, it is actually a tangible asset. And we know, because we've seen these studies. I mean, Google and Gartner did a study. We talk about this all the time. They did a study years ago where they reported a 500% gain in consideration by customers. I think it was like 1,300% gain in purchases, 3,000% gain in willingness to pay a premium for a product or service with which the customer has a high brand connection, right? So considering that fact, why is it that CFOs just still to this day, for the most part, don't see the value in branding? Why do they continually refer to it as a cost when at the end of the day, it's really it's an investment, right? I mean, to me, at least, it's foolish to ignore something that will increase your sales by 10x or more, right? That's real tangible. That's a line item on a spreadsheet. Now, I think CEOs are getting it more. CFOs are tougher. Our job as agencies or as a strategic agency is to educate and inform and explain to them these facts. And it's getting better. I really do think it's getting better. At least that's what we're observing. In your opening, you mentioned all the Fortune 5s that we worked for. And I must say that over the last few years, we have pivoted a bit to working with a lot of these, VC-funded startups and young founders, which has been very refreshing. They're much more open-minded to this idea of brand value being very tangible. So,
On Brand, we'll be right back after this.
Opening a business checking account shouldn't be harder than running your business. So, why do most banks still make you go into a branch? With Live Oak Bank, you can open an account online in minutes. That's because they put you at the center of every decision they make. With convenient digital access and superior customer support, that's small business checking simplified. Open a business checking account today at liveoakbank.com/businesschecking.
This episode is brought to you by La Quinta by Wyndham. Here you are, miles from home and ready to start your vacation. Good thing you're staying at La Quinta by Wyndham. They have free high-speed Wi-Fi to stream all your favorite movies. And in the morning, get fresh waffles with their free Brightside breakfast. Or squeeze in a workout at their fitness center. Either way, you're ready to conquer the day. Tonight, La Quinta. Tomorrow, you triumph. Book your stay at lq.com.
Now, back to the show.
I really think you're onto something with kind of the specifics. I mean, one, you hear that explained, and it does seem like we've, to the actual where we've positioned our definition of branding. But I also think, boy, that's a label that I feel like we, based on how you just used it and described it, really sort of reclaiming the intangible versus tangible, because I think, many of us, myself included, would willingly say, yeah, branding's this intangible thing. That's what makes it so hard.
Yeah.
But the way you connected those dots, I mean, because I feel like, yeah, it does seem like, boy, it's like the Sharks and the Jets, the face off between the financial folks and the branding people, and our tune has always been, the value versus cost. But when you line it up like you just did, then it's real easy for that to all of a sudden, for that investment not to just sound. I always think whenever we go down that road as marketers, brand builders, those folks always hear that as, oh, that's marketing speak. He's trying to do some spin on me. But as you define the tangibility by the people, the products, by these very specific things, then all of a sudden we are investing in those, and I feel like the value equation makes sense. We should be using that tangibility of brand more than I feel like we are.
Yeah, I mean, I first of all, I love agencies, right? I think they do a great job, and they offer an incredible service for companies. And I do think that agencies should sell, or not sell, but sell and tell, right? This story, which is that the brand is tangible, it is very tangible. There's no denying the numbers. The study I referred to was a Google and Gartner study. It wasn't funded by, some big holding company. It's real. And listen, at the end of the day, we know it works. The bottom line is that companies wouldn't spend money at all on brand or advertising for that matter if it didn't work. So we know it works. Our job, again, I'll say it, is to tell that story, that it's tangible, because it is. And I see the trend amongst some of the top agencies, branding agencies, that is, starting to tell this story. For us, we're a boutique that's focused on early stage growth companies right now. We're telling the story over and over again. And the bottom line is that, clients are buying into it, and we're seeing growth when we do it right. So it works.
Well, you talk about seeing growth and the results, and I feel like we're only picking on the big challenging things in brand building today, but I guess that's what the show's all about.
Yeah.
But I also feel like when you set it up correctly, or in this way, like you're talking about in terms of closer to the tangible value, I feel like it isn't that big of a jump to see that that impacts our measurement as well in terms of brand success, which I feel like is the other bad rap that brand building has, is, like you said, cost versus value. And is this even really doing anything? These ads that we're running, these things that we're doing, what do we get for it? Does this help with that also?
Well, listen, I mean, going back to the C-suite, what are they interested in? One thing. They're interested in performance, right? They're looking for growth. They're looking for profit. Why are they coming to agencies? Right? They want success. And I don't mean to demonize CFOs. I love my CFO, and I love some of the CFOs, that are on the client side, or our clients specifically. It's not personal. the bottom line here is that that's what they're looking for. They're looking to increase their business. And how does brand strategy help that? So, I mentioned earlier about aligning it with business strategy. And positioning specifically, I believe, is the most effective way to go after a market, and the tangibility factor is, it's interesting. Again, it's us selling a story or telling that story to our clients and getting them to believe. So we do a better job together when we come up with a brand strategy for them. That's a collaborative process. I mean, you asked about process before. One of the things that we truly believe in is workshopping the methodology with leadership. If you're going to get there, you've got to work with the people who have the vision. And, it's interesting. A lot of the companies that come to us have had bad agency experiences, and we dig into it and ask them questions like, "What happened? What was the brand work that you did? How did it play itself out? Who was actually on the team?" Most of the time, it's not working when when it's being designed by middle managers. This is, highly complex strategic work that needs to be done by people at the top. You have to work with visionary leaders in the C-suite, whether it's CEOs, founders, chair people, so forth and so on. You got to really understand the vision of the company and the market. So, that's where the magic lies. The magic lies in aligning business and brand strategy.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned like who all should be involved as well, because the collaborative process and making sure that you include leadership. I know that there's different sizes of organizations, different types of strategies. Is there a best practice beyond making sure that you have, founder, CEO, potentially board chair types? Are there what other roles are key to have at the table for strategic or for success and strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting. When you are working at that level, you're going to get a lot of subjective opinions, right? So our job is to put together criteria sets, whether we're doing naming or visual brand design or positioning specifically. It's still creative, right? There's creative there's always that involvement of creative, right? What a branding agencies have, who are the people that are on their staff, right? Writers and designers and strategists, right? So you've got people who are in the creative arts. Whenever you're talking about anything creative, it gets very subjective. So for us, it's important for us to put together criteria sets for those things, like I mentioned, naming, logo design, positioning, storytelling, right? To take it out of personal subjectivities. Can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure this is not an ownable story by me. I'm sure the 50,000 agencies that are out there, so many of them have come across this story. I think I even heard about this story on one of your earlier podcasts because I was listening to some earlier episodes where you're working with a CEO and he comes into the room and said, "I see all the work that you're working on, and well, I talked to my wife about it, or I talked to my friend about it, and here's what they think." Right? Right? That story.
Yeah.
We want to take it away from subjectivity and look at criteria sets. Marty Neumeier did a great job in his book, The Brand Gap, about with putting together criteria sets for naming. And there's criteria sets in Acker's book, Rees's book, all these books. Wally Olin's, right? He's got a book actually called On Brand. There's such great information out there for agencies to just absorb and use to create their own version of what their criteria sets are, and keep clients on brand or on process or on strategy, and away from those subjective opinions when it comes to doing the work.
I love the idea of having criteria for different projects too, because a lot of those ones that you listed off there, it's going to require different inputs. It's going to have a different process shepherding it through all the way as well. So definitely something that we don't consider enough. And I like that you cited any number of sources where, I always, one of my questions sometimes is if people are listening to this and want to go do one thing differently when it comes to brand strategy, you listed several resources on doing that. Anything you'd add in terms of doing one thing differently today with regard to brand strategy?
One thing different today. Are we talking about on the agency side, or is this specific to clients?
I would say if it's on the client side, if you're out there looking at your brand strategy, determining next steps, what might you do differently?
Do a good job. I know it sounds so low profile there, but it's really true. We do, brand is our art. So many companies come to us and they haven't done a good job. They haven't considered brand. And I got to be honest with you, even some of the Fortune 5s that we worked with, it's always surprising to me. And sometimes even at the CMO level, the lack of understanding for this type of work. Learn it, understand it, find a great agency. There are a lot of great agencies out there. Understand what it's going to take and trust them, right? The work needs to be good, because the bottom line is, going back to those numbers that I talked about when it comes to brand value, right? It's how do you tell the best story? And if you can tell the best story, you're going to give yourself an advantage. All that positioning that I spoke about, depositioning brands and market, understanding pain points. It all leads to one thing, which is brand story. And the brands that tell the best stories always do better. The brands that tell the deeper stories always do better, because people connect with story. So the strategy part gets you to the story. The strategy part gets you to that narrative, the tone of voice of the story, and how you design it visually. The deeper you go, the better it's going to be.
Well, and that is, I think you connected the dots to a lot of helpful things there, whether it's story, whether it's visuals, that strategy is the foundation of everything. So hopefully folks can, like you said, do it better here based on this.
And it's easier to do it today, right? With digital, you've got this medium. It makes it so much easier. People are attached to their laptops and their smartphones. They can go deep into a website or an app or whatever. So stories can get really, really deep, and now things that David, Eric talk about when it comes to Eric's book, the interaction field, or David's books on positioning and subcategories. I mean, you can go really, really deep with storytelling, and that's a good thing, a really, really good thing. That makes me very optimistic about our industry.
That is great, and I know that this conversation would add to those resources as well in terms of what folks can do differently on this front. Todd, now it is my wonderful privilege to get to ask you for a brand that has made you smile recently.
You fed me this question, so I thought about it. It's easy for me to go to like the Apples and the Warby Parkers of the world. I mean, I love Warby Parker. I love the way they communicate, whether it's on their site, in their store, and their packaging. It's just so personal and spot on. But as I thought about this question over the last week or so, and I found the Benjamin Franklin documentary that Ken Burns just did, and I watched it, and I thought to myself, God, what a great brand that Ken Burns has. What a great storyteller. This is, it's so relevant to Nick's question about, what brand made you smile recently. And I was looking at the Ken Burns brand. And I just, to me, it has such an alignment with what we do as branding agencies, right? And our focus on storytelling for brands specifically, right? Different than what Ken does. He's telling stories about, people like Muhammad Ali and, Benjamin Franklin, but still it's that deep, rich storytelling. And people are just gravitated to it. And it's a wonderful thing. And so that's the brand that made me smile recently.
Well, that's a great example, and especially with your preface of, it's easy to have those brands top of mind, the Apples and the Warby Parkers, but I think even in like the domain of personal branding, I think it's easy to think of the Beyoncés of the world, the Taylor Swifts of who's a personal brand. We go to who is highly visible and popular, but Ken Burns is incredibly popular and certainly staying power, but maybe not in the zeitgeist in the exact same way. And yet him as a personal brand, even, his name being attached to something.
Yes.
It tells you something about what that's going to be and how it's going to be delivered. And you're absolutely right. That's the business that we're in.
Yeah, and he's got this great personal brand, but he's got a company that does the work. I mean, he's working on multiple documentaries at the same time. It's the Ken Burns brand, and it's very respectable. I'm really impressed by it. He keeps on churning out these amazing documentaries about great people. It's wonderful.
Awesome. Well, that is a great smile and a thoughtful on-brand one to boot. Todd, where can folks go to learn more about who you are and what you do?
So our agency is called Fazer, Fazer. Our website is fazer.agency. You can find me on LinkedIn, Todd Irwin with an I and 2 Ds in Todd. And Nick, it's been great to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, we will link up to all of that in our show notes, including the Fazer website, which folks that have listened all the way to the end know that me, a proud Star Trek fan, has not said Fazer like Star Trek once. I guess I just broke that rule and have made the bad dad joke that is expected of me. Well, thanks again.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate that.
for joining us, and hope to chat again soon.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Nick.
On Brand is part of the Marketing Podcast Network. If you like what you're hearing, if we've made you smile, you can always listen free on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite platform may be. And please take a moment and rate and review the podcast to help others find the show. Until next week, I'm Nick Westergaard, and I'll see you on the internet.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.